What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Today, Randy and I are going to be talking about his recent tournament at Lake of the Ozarks. And I'm going to be talking about my personal best bass that I just caught 10 pounds on a jerkbait using the exact same pattern, actually, that was used to win that Lake of the Ozarks tournament. And Randy and I are just going to kind of discuss the pattern that was used to win the tournament and to catch my big bass, the implications on tournament fishing going forward, and there's some pretty exciting announcements coming up here too, so it should be a action-packed stream. Randy, how's it going tonight?
Going good this evening, Johnny. Man, just trying to been reflecting on that Lake of the Ozarks tournament. Was up there all last week and had a real up and down week, and look forward to telling everybody about it.
Yeah, it's definitely some good lessons to learn. That's always a good thing about tournament fishing, is that even if you don't catch them, there's always something you can learn from it, and you take something away.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like it's so if you have a bad tournament, it's so easy like to come away from the tournament and just you want to get home, and you don't have time to talk to anyone. Find out how the fish were caught. But yeah, every one of these tournaments, it doesn't matter if you win the tournament or you finish last. If you're a student of the sport, you have to use it as a learning experience to, do better the next time. I mean, and there's like tournament fishing accelerates the pace of your learning quicker than anything else because the intensity of the fishing that you do there, everything is just really focused, and it's just a great way to learn more about fishing in a short time.
Sure, good deal. Well, excited to break it all down tonight, Randy. And some of the guys are saying congrats on the 10-pounder. I think I think Phil's a little bit confused. He asked if I had a baby. No, I just caught a 10-pound bass, not a 10-pound baby. Fingers crossed, no babies in the near future. Definitely decreased fishing time. I know you know how that is, Randy.
Yeah, I know how it is, man.
Anyways, well, let's jump into it. First thing, actually, guys, that I want to talk about. Normally, I don't start live streams with this, but it's just so cool I have to talk about it. Yesterday, Jewelbait Company, partnering with myself, we launched the first Fish the Moment Jewelbait soft plastic bait. So it's the first bait that I ever helped design in the soft plastic category. You guys have probably heard of the Fish the Moment offshore jig in the past that I've talked about, helped design that. But this is actually a first bait where I basically came up with the design on the front kind of out of my own head, and then the Jewel team obviously came together, helped engineer it and make it possible. And I want to show you guys the bait that we designed, and it is the Versa Craw. Now you guys are probably like, okay, what is the deal? It's just another craw trailer. Well, this trailer, guys, I designed it to be the ultimate jig fishing trailer. How so? Well, the idea behind this is that it's a completely customizable trailer to give you as many options to fish this bait as possible. So coming stock out of the package, there's a bunch of these little gates, and all these little legs are connected together. One way you can fish this, for example, is splitting the inner gates, and now you basically have a chunk-style trailer. The legs will swing freely side to side, and you have a big chunk-style trailer. You can then split the tails even further on the outside, and you get a really big creature bait style trailer where these legs are flapping around, they're moving a lot, moves a lot of water. You can also take off the bigger legs and just leave the smaller legs to get more of a finessey jig style trailer with just a little bit of action, or you can take off the small tails and just give a really big wide action craw trailer that kind of imitates a nice swim jig trailer, and it kicks a ton of water. And there's a lot of other ways you can even rig this too. You can leave the center tails connected and the outside tails. There's a bunch of different ways you can rig this thing. And I kind of have it rigged up on a few different jigs, and it actually comes in 3 different sizes. So you have the biggest size here, we have a medium size, and we have a really, really small size. And so the big size, if we take a look at it on a big jig, this is an 11/16 ounce flipping jig. Looks really, really great on there. Big, meaty trailer. And then you have the medium size on the Fish the Moment offshore jig. And I've actually used this to catch, I caught a 7-pounder on it this winter, a 6-pounder, a ton of 4 and 5 pounders. This trailer is amazing. I've kept them connected here. The outside tails, so it kind of resembles a chunk trailer, especially for those winter fish, but it just works great. And then we also have a tiny size that goes on the Jewel Pee-wee football jig. If you look at that Pee-wee football jig compared to that big flipping jig, it's this little tiny jig trailer, and it goes perfect on the back of that Pee-wee jig. And you can customize this again in a ton of different ways. I have this nice jig right here where I just took off all the tails except for the outside tails. And I've been fishing it with it for like 6 months now, trying to test it out, and it's such a cool trailer. You basically can eliminate 95% of the trailers you need in your boat. I just carry just these now, and it's really cool. We don't have all of the sizes up right now, unfortunately. We just have the smallest size available, and I'll be making a YouTube video about this in the near future once we get more sizes available. But basically, you can just go to jewelbait.com, check out the Versa Craw on the website, and you can see we have it in a black and blue color, a green pumpkin color, and then this is called Bass Whacker, which is the color you saw me holding up. It's basically just a kind of like a root beer color with some gold and purple flake. And this bait, it can be rigged in a bunch of different ways you see here. Currently, we just have the Pee-wee size, the smallest size available, but we're going to be launching the other sizes here in the coming weeks. And so hopefully by the summer, we'll have all 3 sizes out. And that's kind of what's going on there, Randy. Got the new trailer. So hopefully you guys will like that. It's really, the idea is that you don't have to have a chunk, a craw, a finesse craw, and a creature bait all together. You just get one trailer, a couple different sizes, and you're done. Offshore, shallow, everything like that. So what do you think, Randy?
Man, I can see, aside from the football head jig, there's so many different applications. You could Texas rig that thing, use it on a swing head jig. You could use it on a flipping jig. You could use it on a swim jig. I got a feeling that's probably all you're going to be carrying in the boat for about the next 6 months is a handful of offshore fish the moment offshore jigs and the new crawl trailer, man.
Yeah, again, it's over at jewelbait.com. I'll be making a YouTube video when we actually have all the sizes. Where basically we milled and poured all of the smaller sizes just because it was the easiest and the fastest to get out. But as we get going, we're going to get the medium size out, which is what I've been catching a ton of fish on that Fish the Moment offshore jig. And then by the time summer hits, we'll have the big size. And this is going to be a great like swing head bait. I've caught a few fish throwing this in a swing head. I've thrown it just flipping it around. Guys over at Jewel have been hammering them on Bull Shoals for the last few weeks, just flipping this bait into, just like this, and on a jig into bushes and stuff. They've had like 100 fish days on this bait, so it's a pretty cool deal, and I'm excited to get that out. I know we're starting with an ad, I apologize, it's not really an ad, but it's cool because I helped design the bait, so I wanted to kind of brag on it a little bit because I thought it was a cool idea. So it's over at jewelbait.com. That's where guys can find it, jewelbait.com. And it's a Jewelbait company bait. They make it here in the United States, poured in Mountain Home, Arkansas, all U.S. made, U.S. labor, all that stuff. So if that stuff important to you guys, also a great way to support U.S. business, local business. Anyways, so Randy, enough of that. Let's start talking about the recent Lake of the Ozarks tournament, Toyo Series tournament that you had. Kind of a tough one for you. I want you to kind of walk us through what happened on your end, maybe for a few minutes, and then also walk us through the winning pattern and where the disconnect was between what you were trying and what the winner did.
Yeah, this was like one of the most unusual tournaments I've ever fished because, 2 weeks ago, basically the lake was frozen solid. You couldn't get, literally, it was frozen. Every inch of that lake was frozen solid. And when I got to practice for that tournament for 2.5 days. I drove back and forth from my house. It's only a little over an hour up there. And in practice, half of the lake was still froze over. It was like literally half of the places or more that I wanted to fish, I couldn't fish. There was a, quarter, half inch of ice on it still. And so, from that standpoint, I knew that the best areas on the lake were going to be the lower end of the lake, or they were going to be up the Niagara River, where you have the warmest water. There's a spring in the back of the Niagara River. I didn't realize that many people knew about it. I'm sure that everybody got local info because it was a boat show up there. So the first 2 days of practice, I'll show you guys what I did here. Let me present my screen here.
And Darren says Livescope strikes again. Yes, unfortunately, Darren, Livescope struck again. The same pattern that Dustin Connell used to win the Major League Fishing event on Lake Eufaula is pretty much the same thing that they were doing over on Lake of the Ozarks for the win. So
you see my screen there, John?
Yep, I got you.
Okay. So this is basically what I did. The first 2 days of practice, I went down and I stayed on the lower end of Lake of the Ozarks here. This is the area that I did not want to fish because I felt that it was going to get the most traffic from anglers. It just has a lot of notoriety this time of year. And I practiced down here the first 2 days of the tournament. And I wound up, the fishing, I knew it was going to be really tough. I mean, I knew it was going to be grinding a tough tournament, but I wanted to run a lot of these secondary points back in these feeder creeks here. But the problem is most of this water was froze over in practice here. You couldn't even get to it. So I just sort of jumped around and fished what I could in this whole area the first couple of days of practice. And I was getting a few bites. I was getting everything on a jerkbait. Fish were a lot more shallow than what I thought they were going to be. And I felt pretty good about it. I felt that I had enough water that I could run a pretty solid pattern. The big key for me was fishing, like I said, less than 10 foot deep. I wasn't fishing deep at all. There was a lot of big gizzard shad, like up in the back of these pockets and shallow in the back of the feeder creeks there. Big schools of gizzard shad that you could see up on the surface, and that's why I was getting them on that jerkbait. So after the first 2 days of practice, I felt that that's where I wanted to fish. The last day of practice, I had like a little over half a day of practice, and I decided I needed to go up to the Niagara River and check it out. It'd been a while since I'd been up there. So I made a complete switch. I ran way up the Niagara River into this area right here. And this is the little Niagara right here. And the water was beautiful up here. Pretty, for shallow water fishing, you had about 1.5 feet of visibility. The water temperature was in the upper 40s. So it literally was 10 degrees warmer here. But the problem was there was quite a few boats in here that last day of practice. Not bad, it wasn't too bad, but there were still a lot of boats in here. So I got in here and I just started running the good rock transition points, fishing some docks and that type of stuff, and caught a couple nice fish in there. And I wasn't in there that long, and I was just sort of jumping around. So I really felt that the weather that we had forecast for the first day of the tournament was supposed to be calm, sunny, fairly mild day. The water was dirty here. We weren't supposed to have a lot of wind. I really felt that those fish were going to move up shallow in this area, and I could come up here and catch them. So I made a decision the first day of the tournament. I was going to run up here to the little Niangua. And it was this was the first I've ever done my tournament fishing. I was boat number 8, in the first flight. I turned out, let me show you guys what the deal was here. This is like the most wild thing I've ever done. Not the most, but it was a first for a tournament. We took out right here at PB2 in the Grand Glaze right here. So I'm running out, and I'm the lead boat coming out of here. And, that skeeter I got's really fast. So by the time I got to the mouth of the main lake, I was the first boat here. I turned right here onto the main lake, and the lake's froze solid completely. And I've got a 25-mile run, and I start running through this ice. It's 1/4 of an inch deep, and I thought it was going to break up. It was froze solid the entire run up here. Look at this right here, 20 miles. The lake froze solid, and I was running 60 miles an hour over 1/4 inch of ice. And I turned around, and there was like 50 boats in my boat wake following me in the ice I was breaking running up there. I thought my boat wrap was going to be peeled off by the time I got up there, but I was committed to it. Nothing else I could do. So I ran all the way up here, got into the Niangua, and it opened up right here. It wasn't frozen anymore. And by the way, my wrap it didn't do anything to it. It was like there was no evidence at all that I ran through the ice. So I got back up in here, and literally it was like a NASCAR race once I sat down on my first spot. There's boats zooming past me. Every boat eventually on every single secondary point in here, had a boat on it. It was the tightest, biggest boat show I've ever seen. Everybody came up here to get in that dirty water. So to make a long story short, I got in there, I fished what I could. I caught like 10 short fish, and it was noon. I got to weigh in at 4 o'clock, and there were so many boats in there that I couldn't bounce around and like try different stuff. So I decided to bail out after that first day. After at noon, after that first day, I didn't have a fish in the boat. I decided to bail out, and I ran down into this area right here where it was frozen over. And when I got down there that afternoon, it had warmed up enough, it melted all this out. And these pockets right through here are normally really good. So I spent my afternoon of that first day fishing these pockets because I knew they hadn't got any fishing pressure because they were froze, and I never got a bite the rest of the day. It was just absolutely, zeroed the first day, didn't do any good at all. So fishing was tough. Weights were pretty low except for the top 10. And the second day of the tournament, I made a decision to go back down here to the jerkbait fish that I found, and it was the right decision. Basically, I got down in here. I started running, more like the back thirds of all these feeder creek cuts back in the coves here, and I started catching them. And I caught like 25 fish. I wound up catching 4 that weighed almost 9 pounds, which was a good bag in that tournament. And I lost a real nice one, so I should have had, probably 13 pounds that second day. And it was a mistake. I mean, if I had to do over again, I'd have ran down here. I just felt that there was more water down here that wasn't getting pressured. So I didn't have near the boats down in all these little feeder creeks here. And like I said, I wasn't fishing the main lake. I was running back into the back of all these feeder creeks and staying in that 10 foot of water, fishing rock transitions, secondary points, the middle of the guts, that type of stuff. And I just made the wrong decision, Johnny. I should have just, if I wouldn't have went up the Niagara River that last day, if I'd have committed all 3 days of practice down here, it had been a really good tournament. So,
and that's just the way it goes with fishing in general. I think a lot of guys don't understand the impact of just an area of the lake, and it can have on your tournament results. If you're in the wrong section of the lake, you can pretty much blow the tournament out or do terrible. And there's no way really to know before you launch your boat on tournament day. And unfortunately, Randy, you had picked areas on 2 completely different ends of the lake. So you had to run so far to get up to that river. It was hard to split time between both areas. Mm-hmm. And really, I mean, you couldn't blame yourself because you may have got up to the Niagara River and that maybe was where the tournament was going to get won and you could have crushed them. But it just didn't work out like that, which is kind of a bummer. But the guys who were down there were catching them really, really well. But the guy who really dominated was actually getting dialed in with the Garmin Livescope. I know it's your favorite thing to talk about, Randy, your favorite deal. And let me share my screen here for a second, Randy. I want to show a couple different things. And I just want to let you guys in on a little bit of what that guy was doing. I know Randy can give some context as well here, but just based on what I've been doing the last few weeks, I've been catching a lot of fish with the Livescope, especially with the jerkbait, just like Dustin Connell was doing, and that's what this guy was doing. He was throwing an Alabama rig and a jerkbait. And I don't know exactly where he was fishing. He had mentioned he was kind of down towards the dam is the idea of where he was. And when he was fishing down here, he mentioned he was fishing in that maybe 8 to 15 foot zone. And places where I've been catching them really well on lakes, they're very similar to this, is basically getting like halfway back in these pockets and these coves and trying to find areas where the bank bumps out just a little bit. So you're not fishing this super steep style banks. You're getting on banks that bump out just a little bit and then drop off into deeper water. And if you can find areas where there's a more gradual slope to the bank, like kind of like a pea gravel gradual sloping bank, and you can find any sort of cover out there, a brush pile, standing timber, stuff like that, there's a lot of fish that will suspend in these areas just off the bank. They'll also suspend around the boat docks, but the problem with the boat docks is that it's harder to tell which boat docks are productive or effective. However, when you're fishing out in the open, these open areas, or on these open points, it's a lot easier to tell that there's brush there, and it's a lot easier to tell if there's fish there, because you can graph it with your side imaging and your down imaging. Then you can determine an exact spot where those fish are setting up. And that's how this guy was going through. He had like 8 to 10 spots. I read in an article. He knew exactly where those fish were setting up, the depth they were in, and he was targeting them and watching every single fish with the Livescope eat his bait. And I know, Randy, you were fishing in the same area of the lake here, and you caught some really good fish the second day and even had one that came off. But this guy was catching 20 pounds a day. And at least from my opinion, I feel like the difference was that you were just basically kind of going and running the rock transitions and running good-looking areas that were visible above the water. However, this guy was really dialing it in under the water, not only knowing the exact cast he needs to make with the cover down there, but also the exact retrieve to make by watching his bait on the Livescope. And even though you were in the exact same water, the exact same depth, throwing the same baits basically, his ability to use the Livescope and target the specific casts and target the bass behavior with his bait basically was the difference between catching 8 to 13 pounds and catching 20 pounds. Would you agree with that?
Oh, there's no doubt. And, if I did a video for my YouTube channel, a couple days before that tournament, I made the comment that I knew that the wild card in this tournament was going to be the Alabama rig and the Livescope. But at Lake of the Ozarks, it would really surprise you because a lot of times, more than not, at this time of the year in March, the Alabama rigs don't win the tournaments. It's normally like a big spinner bait, like a 3/4 ounce spinner bait, jerk bait, jig, something like that, and I really thought it would be the same way here. But the thing that I didn't realize was the impact that lake had when it froze over. The water was so cold. I mean, it was literally in the mid 30s in most of the practice time, that it put those fish out in those areas that a lot of the top 10 finishers did. And a lot of those guys were fishing over the man-made brush piles with the Alabama rig. They had it real specifically dialed in. But I'll tell you another thing about this is I've got several of my friends that they're locals up there that fish that tournament too, and they know all about the deep brush. They've got hundreds of piles, and they were Alabama rigging as well. And a lot of them zeroed both days of the tournament. Mm-hmm. So there was something that they were keyed in on specifically, whether it be the depth, the bait, the retrieve, whatever. That it wasn't as easy as just going out there and putting an Alabama rig in your hand and going fishing.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've realized, Randy, the last few weeks, I've really been even the last few months, I've had the Livescope in my boat. One thing I've realized about the Livescope is that for me, I learn a ton about bass behavior from the Livescope, and I actually don't necessarily need the Livescope to catch the fish that these guys are catching on Lake of the Ozarks in these pockets over these brush piles. But if you can understand the bass behavior first with the Livescope, you could go into a tournament and catch those fish without the Livescope. You just kind of have to understand what you're doing, and the Livescope allows you to get a better picture of that. And a great example of this, let me share my screen here, Andy, is actually was out on a little local lake of mine yesterday, and I happened to snatch an old 10-pounder. First double-digit bass of my life, caught him off the Livescope over a brush pile on a jerkbait, just like the guys at Lake of the Ozarks were doing, just like Dustin Connell. I apologize for the graininess of this footage. I took this off my phone because I wasn't even prepared to fish. I was actually filming some stuff on electronics, and I went to fish for like 20 minutes. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, I might make a few casts, and I had to record my Livescope off my phone. But if you look at this image, you can actually see the brush pile right here. It's kind of grainy, and you can see a few fish swimming after my bait. This is actually a 5-pounder I caught. This was not the 10-pounder. I didn't get the 10-pounder on Livescope. I actually caught the fish. This first 5-pounder was with the Livescope. The 10-pounder, I didn't even see it on the Livescope. I was just casting over the brush pile. I'll talk about that in a second. But you actually watch that 5-pounder eat my jerkbait, and then you can see me reeling them in over the top of that brush, which is really crazy. But what I found out was that after I caught that fish out of that brush pile, basically I made another cast back in that exact same area, and I'm not going to show the little lake I was on because it doesn't have contours or anything. But right here, let's say it was just off this little point, I was able to make a cast across that again with the jerk bait, and the bait I caught on was a Smithwick Perfect 10 Rogue, for those who are interested. The brush pile was in like 12 foot of water. I was throwing it in this table rock gold color right here, and I was working it down. I upgraded the stock treble hooks one size, so that bait sunk just a tiny bit, and it would do is just the slightest bit of that like slow sinking. It would fall like a foot every 3 or 4 seconds, and I was working it down there over those brush piles slow, and it was the perfect size bait. It was a big bait, and that 10-pounder ate it head first, and the entire bait was out of sight. And this is a big jerk bait, guys. This is a 5.5-inch jerk bait, not a small bait, but he ate the entire thing head first. Pretty crazy deal. And I'll pull up a picture here of the fish here. I probably should have had this pulled up. Let me pull up my picture of my 10-pounder, Randy. I got to brag a little bit, right? When you catch a 10-pounder.
A 10-pounder in Arkansas is like catching a 15-pounder in Texas or Florida. So that is unbelievable fish, man. Like we talked about, I know that's the first 10-pounder I've ever heard caught around here, in forever, decades.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like a lot of guys I know are catching 10-pounders in Texas or Florida or California, but like I've fished in Arkansas my whole life. I've never seen a 10-pounder ever. Like in a tournament, anyone catch, I've never seen a 10-pound bass in Arkansas ever. I've seen them in Texas, I've seen them in other places, and I've hooked a couple fish in Arkansas that were this big, that I feel like were this big and they came off. I've had some bad luck, but there's my old 10 pounder on the big jerkbait. That's a 5.5 inch jerkbait, so you can get a scale for how big that fish is. That little jerkbait looks like a little junior sized jerkbait. But basically, I was able to go over the area and I was fishing a little point and work that jerkbait over the top of it. I caught a 5 pounder my first cast. Next cast, I caught a 10 pounder, and then I actually turned the Livescope off. And what I was doing is instead of using the Livescope, I started using my 360 imaging to kind of look for the brush piles and make casts on them. And I was able to catch a 2.5 pounder and a 5 pounder over brush piles again without the Livescope. And what I would do is graph over those brush piles with my side imaging, with my down imaging, find the brush. And it wasn't necessary to use the Livescope, but what it did is it clued me into the bass behavior. So I knew that those fish were in those brush piles. I was throwing a jig in them at first, not getting any bites, threw the jerkbait over the top of them, and that was the bait that caused them to react. And because I was throwing that jig in there on the Livescope, I saw they weren't reacting to the jig, reeled it in, threw the jerkbait over there, and got them to bite. Now, what that tells me is that usually when I fish brush piles, I might pull up with a jig, I might pull up with a swim bait. For whatever reason, though, they wouldn't eat a swim bait, a move-in swim bait. They wouldn't eat a jig. They wanted that slow, pausing bait over that brush. And I think that over the years, I've probably left hundreds or thousands of bass in the lake on brush piles and other offshore areas because I'm not experimenting with baits that have different cadences. What I mean by that is that baits that go to the bottom like a jig, baits that go over the top of the brush like a crankbait, something suspended like a jerkbait. And that's what the Livescope for me is the most helpful for, is dialing in that bait presentation. I don't think it's that big of a deal, honestly, to help me find the fish, because I actually saw all those fish that I caught out of that brush pile. I saw them on my side imaging and down imaging first before I ever made a cast. So I knew that those brush piles, or those fish were in that brush pile. I didn't use the Livescope to find them. But the Livescope helped me dial in that bait presentation, and it's kind of overrated, like watching the fish follow your bait and eat it. Like, I don't really think that really matters. I'm not good enough with the Livescope to like follow my jerkbait the entire cast. That's hard to do with the wind and the current and stuff like that. But just getting a better sense of what the bait needs to be dialed in, that for me is really what makes the difference. And I think a lot of guys who don't fish offshore, they think this Livescope is going to make a good angler go from catching 0 fish to catching 100 fish. I don't think that's true. I think that if you know what you're doing, you should be able to catch 80 to 90% of the bass without the Livescope. The trick is, are you going to get dialed into that bait as quickly or fast enough to determine what the correct bait is? That's, I think, the trick with the Livescope. What are your thoughts on that, Randy?
Well, I agree completely with that. I got a question for you, Johnny. Do you think that you would have been able to catch that fish just with 2D sonar? Like if you were just, if you were on that lake and you're graphing looking for brush piles and you had your GPS or your triangulation, do you think you'd caught that same fish with 2D?
Yeah, if I could, I was actually graphing that brush pile for an electronics video. I saw them on 2D. I have screenshots where I could show you the fish on my 2D sonar, and I don't know where it is right now, but you can actually see them on 2D. The thing is that I don't know if I would have made the connection to pick up the jerkbait over that brush pile. That was the difference. So I really think that you can catch a lot of these fish without the Livescope, because the fish I was catching, if we pull up my screen again, they were related to a piece of cover. They were related to a brush pile. Whenever fish are related to cover, like a brush pile like this, those bass, you know exactly where to cast. You have a zone of where to cast in. So if you bring the right bait by there, you can still get them to bite. You can change your retrieve and your cadence to get them to bite and things like that, and change your baits. The thing with Livescope that I feel like is a big game changer is when those fish are not related to cover, when they're out in the middle of nowhere. That's when it's really tough to get those fish to bite, because you have to you're basically casting at the fish. Here I was casting at a brush pile. So I guess my thing is that, yes, the Livescope is helpful in that situation, but I don't think it's one of those deals where you couldn't catch them without it. But there are situations like on Lake Swepco, when I went out there and was catching them, chasing schools of gizzard shad out in the middle of nowhere, that you need the Livescope or you're never going to catch those fish.
Well, here's sort of the way I see it, and let me know what you think about this. It's like when you're dealing with this pre-spawn, fishing Alabama rigs and jerk baits over brush piles, that type of stuff, it seems like to me that it's just not that simple. You have to have the right combination of the right water clarity. The brush has to be in that right depth. And my question is like, what is that zone? It's like, what is that zone as far as the combination of water clarity and water depth that brush pile tops out in that will allow those fish to come up out of that brush pile. I mean, like for example, if you got a brush pile in 10 foot of water, 20 foot of water that, comes up to like 12 or 15 feet, is a fish still going to come out of that brush pile with like a Megabass Vision 110+1 that runs close to 10 feet deep? Can you still pull that out of there? And what's the water clarity that you have to do that? I mean,
Yeah,
there's a lot of variables there.
there's so many variables, and I didn't figure it out, honestly. Like, when I was out there, all I knew is I was throwing a Vision 110+1. That was the jerkbait I started with, and I didn't get bit. And I saw those fish in that brush pile with that Livescope, and I was like, why can't I get these fish to bite? And so I was throwing the jig, I was throwing all these baits, finally picked up that +1, or that Perfect 10 Rogue, and that's what triggered those fish. And that's what I got all my bites on. I went to a Megabass, I was throwing a KVD jerkbait, I threw all these different jerkbaits. They just wouldn't, it seemed like that jerkbait needed to get right next to that brush pile, like almost hitting it, but not quite in it. And that's really tough to do too if you don't have the Livescope to see exactly what depth without hitting the brush itself. So that's another trick with it that does help with the Livescope, is knowing exact depth to get that bait. Not necessarily even seeing the fish, but seeing where that bait is in relation to the cover is super, super helpful as well.
So if you get your Alabama rig or your jerkbait hung up in that brush pile, which probably happens a lot, do you go get it or do you break it off and not spook the fish? I'm thinking from a tournament perspective.
That is tough. I mean, I don't even know if breaking that bait off, that might still spook them. Like, I don't ever hardly get fish out of brush where I break off a jerkbait or a jig or whatever out of a brush pile, and I catch more fish out of that brush pile. It happens every once in a while. But one thing, too, that's weird with that brush pile deal, Randy, is that when I was catching those fish, I would catch one or maybe two fish out of a brush pile, and then they would shut off. But you could see more of them down there on the Livescope. There were more fish in that brush, but they wouldn't actually eat. After you catch a couple of them, they get kind of lethargic, they get messed up. Now, I've noticed that with brush pile fishing forever. Like, you'll catch one or two fish out of a pile, then, sometimes you'll get lucky and catch 5 or 6 fish out of a pile, but usually it's one or two fish, and then you leave, come back 2 hours later, and they've reset up, and you can catch them again. So that's something I've seen for sure.
And, the whole thing about that is when and this Lake of the Ozarks tournament was a perfect example. It's like when you're focused on that deep brush, whether it be in pre-spawn or post-spawn or whatever like that, and particularly like this time of year, it's a commitment because you can't go out and say, well, I'm going to try fishing deep brush with an Alabama rig for a couple hours and see how it goes. You have literally got to do it from the time you go out there till the time you go in, because you may find 50 piles and 2 or 3 of them will have fish in it. So, one of the things I will say about anglers that like to fish like this, which to me, this is the most unappealing way that I could possibly think about fishing, as far as if I would go out and try to catch some bass. I admire the guys that have the discipline to do that, because it takes as much discipline to do that as it does like what I was doing as far as running pockets. I mean, I was running 75 pockets a day. I was committed to that pattern. And it's the same with fishing that deep brush. I mean, it's that to me, that's what all about. That to me, tournament fishing and bass fishing, there's a fine line between commitment and staying open-minded, because you can do well either or you can get burned either or.
Yeah, I honestly think with that brush pile deal, Randy, like, I don't think Livescope is... I think a lot of guys are kind of overblowing it a little bit with the Livescope on the brush pile deal, because I can go through here in Lake of the Ozarks, graph for 8 hours, find every single brush pile in the area, and I can tell you with my side imaging and down imaging which brush piles have fish in them and which brush piles don't. If you're good with your electronics, that's really not that difficult at the end of the day. It's really not that hard to determine which brush piles have fish and which ones don't. Again, it's that dialing it in, and you can dial it in so much faster, where if I was running then the brush piles I saw that have fish, it might take me twice as long to dial in the bait, which then takes extra time out of my fishing day, which then makes me less efficient. And I'm actually going to make a video about this here, Randy, talking about 360 imaging versus Livescope versus all these different sonars, and kind of talking about what the probability is of catching fish with each of those. So how much more efficient does Livescope versus 360 and all this stuff make you? I've been collecting this data for the past 6 months, and I've been wanting to make this video for a while, but I wanted to make sure I had it right. And I'm going to kind of go into it, literally taking the probabilities the best I can to explain how many extra fish Livescope or 360 imaging or just having side scan will generate. And I think that it'll be pretty interesting. In general, though, I would say that the Livescope is allowing guys to catch three, maybe two, three more fish a day over just using no forward-facing sonar at all. And in a tournament situation, that's massive, especially if they're big ones.
Yeah, and another thing about that is like when okay, say for example, if you were fishing this tournament, and you probably would have smoked in this tournament up there the way it was set up, but when you go out and you're graphing those piles in the pre-spawn like this, I mean, say for example, you find 50 piles in a day, are you going to fish only the ones that you can see the fish in them, or are you going to fish them even if you don't, even if they're there and maybe the fish are tucked in the brush real thick and you can't see them? I mean, how do you discern what is a good pile or not without fishing it, unless you just going by what you see?
So there's a couple ways I do it, and I actually this is a great great segue for that, Randy, because I don't want to give away all my secrets. If you guys are interested in actually knowing how I do that specifically, I'm actually going to be doing an advanced electronics seminar on fishthemoment.com. So you guys have heard to the website, our website, fishthemoment.com, and then head over to the virtual seminars page. Here you'll see a couple of our upcoming virtual seminars. One of them is our advanced spring jig fishing seminar. It's going to be focused on pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn jig fishing. And I'm going to be doing an advanced electronics seminar that's focused on how to identify. Randy's question was, is if you have 50 brush piles, how do you determine which ones to fish? Well, short answer, Randy, is that I will fish brush piles that I don't see fish in if I see a lot of certain elements around it and if I see specific situations. I'm not going to get into that in the live stream here, but I will talk about that in my advanced electronics seminar. So definitely sign up for that if you want to learn how to really dial in and eliminate spots. I can show you on my electronics situations where you will be shocked that I caught fish out of the areas I'm going to show you in this class, but I caught a ton of fish out on them. And then some areas where it's really obvious, you would think fish would be biting, they're not biting. And that's really the goal with this class, is to show you all the situations where you might miss. It is literally advanced electronics. It's not basic interpretation or anything like that. I'm not going to explain what side imaging does, 2D sonar, how to identify fish. All that stuff I have for free on YouTube on the Fish the Moment channel. But if you want really advanced, high detail on like how to maximize your electronics, this is the seminar over at fishthemoment.com. While you're over there, you might as well swing over and check out some of the lake breakdowns we have, 40 GPS waypoints. Randy puts these maps together by season on lakes all across the country. We have a ton of maps for winter, spring, and fall. We also have our personal map breakdown, so that is the deal. But yeah, Randy, I'll save that nugget for the seminars, but there is a system I use. And obviously I don't fish tournaments anymore, but for me, the big thing is like I have to go to a lake, and whenever I go fishing, guys, if you ever watch any of my YouTube videos, I'm not out there practicing for a week ahead of time. Like I go out the day of the thing, I'll go to the Lake of the Ozarks, I would just graph. I graph for 4 or 5 hours of my day. I fish for like 2 hours, and that's what I do. And I find enough fish to catch fish on that day in that video, and that's it. And I have to find the fish the day of, otherwise I literally waste a day. And for me, wasting a day is wasting money, because my business is making YouTube videos and teaching. So I have to find fish as fast as possible and as consistently as possible. And that's what I've really developed, Randy, with my system. And it's different from what a lot of pro fishermen have to deal with, because literally I'm under the pressure of, if I don't get a video today, I'm not going to make money. And that's how I have that pressure, where I have to catch fish to teach. So that's how I always think about it. And so I've developed strategies to find fish very quickly with my electronics and consistently. And that's what I talk about in the electronics seminar. That's what I talk about on Fish the Moment. Every video you see, guys, it's my first day going to the lake. I go to the lake. A lot of times I haven't been to the lake for a year. I show up, I graph around for 4 hours, find the fish, show you how I caught them. That's it. That's how I do it.
Well, here's sort of, back to Lake of the Ozarks, here's sort of my takeaway with that I think maybe this will help guys learn some information here. It's like there's two different camps on this. Okay, you've got the guys that did good fishing deep, and you've got a handful of guys, not very many, that did good fishing shallow in that tournament. From my perspective, this is the deal as far as the two different systems. If you committed to deep water in this tournament, it's not as much figuring out how to generate the strike in those deep brush piles. It's more about finding the cover. It's more about locating the bass, because when you're dealing with bass that are 25 to 30 foot deep, a lot of times they're going to be pretty aggressive. They're not going to be real finicky if they're down there in that zone. On the other hand, if you're dealing with shallow water targets, like I was fishing up the Niagara River, it is so bait and angle specific. For example, like I said, there were 50 guys fishing up there,
Mm.
and the only person I know that did any good up there was Russ Lane. And I read a little deal today that he was fishing a little flat-sided crankbait up there, and sometimes that can make all the difference in the world. If you go up there with a spinnerbait or a jig or a tube or a wigglewort or a square bill crankbait, you may be fishing over all the fish in the world unless you dial in to that exact bait that they want, whether it be the color, it could be the profile, it could be their speed of retrieve, it could be the line size, it could be the time of day. Those fish up there are so in the shallow water than the pre-spawn. They're so bait specific. So it's all about if you're fishing deep, it's basically locating the fish, and if you're fishing shallow, it's figuring out how to catch those fish that you know that are there. So, and you can do well either or, because, like I said, the guy that won that tournament, Mike Harlan, he blew the tournament
Oh
out. I
yeah.
mean, he won the thing by like 15 pounds or something like that. But if you take that weight off of that tournament, and second place is down around the 40s or something, then the shallow water anglers can become competitive and actually possibly win that. But here's the deal from what I've seen anymore about this whole overview. It's like you can go out in these tournaments and you can cast checks and you can finish decent fishing shallow. But more times than not, if you're going to win the tournament, it's going to get won deep offshore, not necessarily fishing deep, but fishing offshore in that more subtle type stuff. And it's getting more and more like that, where you just do not hear about any mega bags coming shallow. Back in the day when I started fishing tournaments in the 80s and 90s professionally, there were lots of big bags of fish caught in less than 5 foot of water. You just don't see that anymore. All these big, massive bags of fish are being caught with using electronics, fishing offshore, fishing subtle structure. And the sport's changing, man. It's changing before our eyes on what it takes to win these tournaments. I can't hear you, Johnny. I think you got your audio off. I still can't.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah,
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Someone had mentioned, or I want to give an example of what you're talking about here, Randy, just using Google Earth. And someone had mentioned Brewer Lake. This is Brewer Lake. They said they caught a 10-pounder out there, which is awesome. This lake is loaded. There are 10-pounders that are caught in Arkansas. I've heard of a lot of fish caught in Arkansas are 10 pounds. I just have never caught one. I've lost like 3, I feel like, that were in that range. I've caught a lot of 8s, a lot of 7s and 8s in Arkansas, but never a 10. So that was that. But if you look at this map here, this is a lake that's at full pool. And on Brewer Lake, you can go down the bank and there's a ton of flooded bushes and cover. It's just the fishiest looking lake ever. You can catch them sometimes too, just flipping cover, throwing a spinnerbait, a buzzbait. But you're usually going to have to maximize every bite, like Randy talks about, and have the perfect bait. However, if you get a little bit further off the bank on Brewer, and I can actually take this lake back in time when you can see it's super low. There's a lot of times when this lake is really, really low, and these fish get offshore. Now, a lot of times they're not offshore in terms of being super deep. So, like, they're not out there in 20, 30 feet of water. One of my best little stretches is over here in this flat. The top of this flat is like, this ditch right here might be 6 feet of water. And up on top, there's a bunch of these stumps. And I've caught so many 4 to 6 pound bass off these little stumps in 3 feet of water, and like these stumps over here. And I actually would just like drop a little pin on them like this, and I would mark it stump. And I've made a video on how to do this, guys. If you can actually transfer these pins to your fish finder and save them on your map. Just go to Fish the Moment, Google Earth. You'll be able to watch the video of how I explain how to do this, transfer these to your fish finder. But basically, these stumps and stuff like that are in 2-3 feet of water, but I would target them with square bill crankbaits, jigs, stuff like that. And normally this lake is way up here. It's high. So it looks like this is out in the middle of the lake, and it looks like I'm fishing offshore. But I'm really fishing in like 3 feet of water. It's just way off the bank. And that's how I've always fished, guys. I'm a target-oriented fisherman, and it's really becoming the way that a lot of these major tournaments are being won. Guys with their electronics targeting isolated objects, not necessarily deep, like really far offshore, but like isolated stump rows or an isolated bush that you might not normally be able to see, or then like a more obvious brush pile, things like that. That's what's really dominating tournament fishing because of the increased fishing pressure. A ton of guys are going and fishing down the banks nowadays, guys. Especially this last year, it was crazy on the lakes. And these fish are getting pressured to to very subtle areas. And going and fishing an isolated stump is not always easy. I've been doing that since I was like 16 years old on this lake, and I'd have all these little stumps marked, and I would make 1,000 casts before I had 360 and Livescope. I didn't have 360 or Livescope till 6 months ago. So I was just hitting these with the triangulation method back in the day, dropping marker buoys, using the waypoint method. If you guys want video on that, just type in Fish the Moment, how to hit offshore areas. I have a video explaining how to do all the old school methods. And I'll make a new video about that here soon. But that's what Randy's kind of talking about. Is that what you were getting at, Randy, the isolated target deal?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's changing like that, man. Those fish they're not stupid. I mean, those fish evolve to fishing pressure quicker than anything that they do. I mean, that's how they've survived and sustained themselves for hundreds of thousands of years. So I don't think a lot of people realize how bass evolved to fishing pressure. I mean, whether it be trolling motor noises, just increased outboard motor noises, casting, whatever like that. So it's an interesting study of bass behavior, man. It is.
For sure. And one thing I'm actually going to be doing, Randy, is I'm going to start doing a lot more studying into bass behavior on my channel, where I'm actually going to start dropping like random objects out in the middle of the lake that are obviously not, I'm not going to drop like lead or something, but shoving like natural objects in the middle of the lake and seeing how fish relate to them and react to them. And I kind of want to do some time series studies on some of my lakes of like what these fish are setting up on, like finding a flat where there's nothing, and then dropping like a random log out in the middle of the lake and seeing when the fish pull up on that and going back every week and checking it, see if there are fish there. I'm going to do some stuff like that, guys. I think you guys will enjoy. Try and do some more test studies as opposed to just going out and catching fish and fishing. I think you guys might find a little more value out of that. So,
one of the things about fishing, because I'm always studying bass and their behaviors, like, I remember they did a study, it's like 20 years ago. There was one biologist, he had a tracking device on 3 different bass. And I can't remember, it was on some lake back east. I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, these 3 bass were caught throughout all over in different parts of the lake. And they monitored these 3 bass for like probably a 6-month period. One of the bass, when they released them right there at the same place, one of the bass swam like 300 yards down the bank, and it sort of lived around this underwater log. It stayed within that couple 100-yard range for like 6 months. The other bass took off, and he went like 10 miles down the lake, and he would stop off for a few days at one area, but he was just keeping moving, and he went like 10 miles. And another bass, it actually swam like 30 miles away from where it was released. So that's just, to me, that just tells you that when you try to analyze and you try to determine what bass behavior is, you have to look at it in terms of different groups of fish on the lake. We think in terms, when we talk about bass movement, bass behavior, when we talk about that, I think we tend to lump too big of groups of bass into one category. But in my opinion, a lot of the bass are individualistic. They're just like people. They have personalities unique to themselves. They have habits. They have different behaviors, and that's one of the most fascinating things about fishing to me is that study. I found that incredible.
That is crazy. I think that's really, really cool. I don't know how, I need to talk to the Game and Fish too. I think that'd be cool if I could try to find a way to track. I know the guys over here in the Arkansas Game and Fish, maybe I could conduct a study with them or something too. I think that'd be fun to do some studies like that, especially on a little bit bigger lake like a Table Rock or something. So I don't know, maybe. Yeah. I think that'd be fun.
I don't know if it would, if you'd learn more or if it confuse you more. We'd learn,
For sure.
It's all about breaking myths, man. There are so many myths in fishing all the time that as soon as you think you've got something figured out, those bass are going to do something and do completely different. Another prime example, Lake of the Ozarks. Okay, you guys tell me this. I mean, you guys send us a few comments on this question. Water temperature 34 degrees. There's ice on the water, and you have gizzard, shad, and bass in 3 foot of water in 34-degree water that I caught in that tournament. And then in the same area, like a mile away, you've got guys catching bass 30 foot deep. So why are some bass 3 foot deep in 34-degree water and others are 30 or 40 foot deep? It's crazy. If you guys got that figured out, let me know, because I'd like to know. Yeah. But ultimately, one of the things that here's one thing that I found out in fishing for over the past 50 years is you catch bass where they're at. Don't overanalyze it. Don't try to figure it out. The bass are just where they're at. And a lot of times, it doesn't make any sense why they're there or not.
Yep, for sure. No, I agree with that. Couple things, couple questions. One thing that I'd like to talk about is just the fact that Advanced Electronics seminar I mentioned, that's a repeat of the last one I did. So if you did the one in January, you've already seen it. It's already been done, so you can check that out. You don't have to check it out again. It's just for those who haven't had the seminar before. Another thing I want to talk about, Randy, real quick while everyone's on, is I got to talk about my new bait that I just released with Jewelbait Company, helped design it, brought the idea to them, and I want to show you guys this bait. It is the Jewelbait Company Versa Craw. So this is the Versa Craw. It's a brand new jig trailer we created, and it's an awesome deal. Basically what it is, guys, is a jig trailer where you have all of these different appendages that are attached together. So when you get out of the package, you can basically have all of these things are connected together, and there's these little gateways. You can split the gateways, for example, like this in the center, and that will give you a chunk style trailer. You just have the chunk. This one's already been broken apart, but you can see like on this little smaller version, the gates are so connected. So you have a chunk style trailer. You can then spread them all apart. You can get a really versatile creature style bait with a bunch of different tails going on. You can take off the outside legs and just get a really finessey trailer like this where you have the inner tails, or you can pin back the inner tails and you get a really aggressive type swim jig trailer with, this has a ton of action. They're wide and spread apart. And on a jig, it's awesome because we have a big size. This is the biggest size of the trailer. You can put a big 11/16 ounce flipping jig like this. If you keep it all together, it's like a beaver style bait where it has a slow fall. You can rig it like a chunk or a creature bait. You then have the medium size, which is the size I've been catching a lot of fish on this winter. It's a lot smaller in proportion, you can see there. I've been throwing the back of the Fish at the Moment offshore jig, crushing them. And it's kind of cool, Randy, to have a bait where I'm throwing a trailer that I designed with a jig I designed. I never thought that would ever happen, especially at the age of 26. I have a jig that I designed and a craw trailer, so pretty solid deal right there. And then we have a peewee size, and that's actually the one we have available on the website right now. It's this tiny little size for the Jewel peewee football jig. If you compare the peewee to the medium size, you can see there's a pretty big size difference. If you compare the peewee to the big size, there's a very big size difference. And basically, I'll show you guys where you can get this bait. It's over on jewelbait.com. You can head over to jewelbait.com. Pull it up over here and just go there and you can find, it's called the Versa Craw. We currently only have the peewee size available, the 2.5 inch, but we're going to be adding the medium size, the junior size, and the senior size very, very soon. And so within the next couple of months, we'll have all of them available, hopefully sooner than that. And we have three colors. We have a green pumpkin color. We have a bass whacker color, which is kind of like a root beer with a purple and gold, and then a black and blue color. We'll have that with those three sizes. 7 ways to rig it. The idea, Randy, is I just got tired. Honestly, in my boat, I had like a tub. You know how much I like to fish a jig. I throw a jig all the time. I had a literal tub in my boat of all these trailers. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm carrying 75 packages of trailers in all these colors, all these bait styles, all this stuff. And it was just frustrating to me because I just didn't want to have like a small trunk, a big chunk, all these different things. I mean, you have to have, if you have like, for example, Zoom bait, you have to have the Zoom salty chunk, you have to have the Zoom regular chunk, you have to have it in 3 different sizes. That's 9 packages right there, and you're not talking about craws, creature baits, bigger chunks. It's crazy. Well, with this, I like put my head down. I was like, I gotta figure this out. You can literally take this one chunk, and I've taken everything else out of my boat, and I've been fishing this for 6 months now. I've been testing this for 6 months. You could take this one trailer, and there's really only maybe 1 or 2 other trailers. I might have like a really big brush hog or something that I might still carry, and that's pretty much it. That's the only other thing I've really thrown. Maybe they're like a little twin or a little single tail grub. But basically, you can get away with every fishing application by just removing the tails, going to the 3 different sizes. It's pretty sweet. I have like 9 packages of plastics in my boat now. That's it. It's pretty awesome. It saved a bin that was like this big, taking up all my 18-foot boat. It took up like half the storage of my 18-foot Triton. Now I can like add more other stuff I'm not throwing because I'm just throwing this. But anyways, that was enough ranting. I'm just excited about it, guys. Thanks for listening to the spiel there.
Hey, why don't I have any yet? I'm here. I hear you talking about this. I don't even have any of them.
I know.
try that out, man. But no, that thing I can see half a dozen applications on different stuff. That's going to be a big producer this spring, no doubt, man.
Yeah, just head over to jewelbait.com. I'll be making a video about it when the junior size is available, and then also when the bigger size is available. I'll make it over on the Main Fish Moment channel. Also, sorry about my nails. I do need to cut my nails. I've been like, I'm terrible about cutting my nails, Randy. I always look like I got female nails going on because I just am always like, I'm more focused on fishing and video editing, and my wife always gives me crap that my nails are longer than hers, and I always forget to cut them. So yeah, apologize about my nail care, guys. I don't know why you guys are worried about that, but that's how it goes. But anyways, and then yeah, that's pretty much it. Any other comments on that, Randy, before we keep going?
Yeah, like I said, I can't wait to see how you do with that this spring. On the with the football jig setup. That's going to be interesting. But hey, I'm address one question here because I've seen a bunch of comments. A lot of guys interested to know what the plaque is behind me, and that was a plaque from one of my best friends, Sergeant Major Rodney Schmolak, Army Rangers. He got a Silver Star in Vietnam, and Rodney and I he practiced with me for 7 years on the FLW tour. He gave me the Silver Star before he passed away, so that's sort of my honor to Sergeant Major Smolak, one of my best buddies.
That's awesome. Yeah, and thanks for his service. That's really great. Cool deal. Awesome. Well, Randy, we basically talked about your Lake of the Ozarks recap, talked about my 10-pounder, fishing the same pattern, talked about brush piles. Last thing I want to talk about, which I know this is going to be, hot topic, but basically, I want to know what your plans are for the Garmin Livescope. You've seen this. I'll pull up the footage again here. You've seen me just, using the Livescope. Here's a video of a 5-pounder following my jerkbait and eating it on a brush pile. Again, I caught a 10-pounder and a 5-pounder after that without needing the Livescope. So it's not like it's the end all be all. You don't need it to catch fish, obviously, but it's pretty cool. What are your thoughts? When are you going to get it? Are you going to get it? Do you think it's going to get banned in tournaments? Give me all your thoughts. I want to hear it all.
Yeah. Well, we could take up a whole show on that. Okay, I'm going to give you guys my unfiltered live scope forward facing sonar deal. We talked about this a little bit before, but I'll sort of it's such a topic. We get so many questions on it. I don't like it. I don't like the direction it takes the sport. I think that you're opening up a can of worms down the road that takes away a lot of the reason that we fish, the purity of it, the therapeutic aspects of it, and the sportsmanship of it. It becomes more of a commercial pursuit rather than a sport. And if you guys have ever waded creeks, that's how I started fishing, is wading. If you're a creek wader, you understand the intimate relationship between the natural world and the water. You got the currents, you got the rocks, you got the crawfish, you got the eddies, you're connected to that experience. And the more that we get into technology like the Livescope, the more that we're divorced from that, the more that we lose contact with that magic that I really think is in fishing. So that's my core foundation belief on it. As a competitive angler and somebody that lives in reality and somebody that lives in the real world, I've got to get one, because I can sit here and gripe and complain about it all I want to, but I might as well just give everybody my money and not even show up to the tournaments if I don't have this technology in some point. So when I get my next rig, I think I'm going to be getting my new boats in May or June. I'm going to talk to Jonny about this. I'm going to have some type of forward-facing sonar on it, possibly some 360 technology on it, and then I'm gonna have Jonny give me like an extensive lesson on how to use that, and I'm going to try to apply that technology to the way I like to fish. I may not be out there graphing, offshore like Jonny does with it, but I may be able to find an application the way my fish under my strengths, the shallow water, the mid-depth water, that type of stuff. And I fully plan on getting one. I'm going to be kicking and screaming and going and having rants and going off on it, how much I can't stand it to Jonny and on Fish the Moment and on my own YouTube channel. But until they're banned, I can undermine my own success, or I can just use it like everybody else is. But and so yeah, I'm going to have it on my boat, but at the same time, I'm going to be complaining about it, and I'm going to wish it wasn't here at the same time. So that's sort of my stance on it.
That's cool, and that kind of is interesting because what I've found with Livescope is I actually don't like fishing with the Livescope that much. I don't really find that much enjoyment in it, just because it does. It if I feel like I can just go on the bank and just scan around and look for fish. For me, a lot of the enjoyment is actually I still like the driving around on my boat. Maybe I'm just like a sucker for pain or something. I put basically at this point I put 1,000 hours on my Mercury on my boat, so I love idling around and find them on the side, scan down imaging. Just for me, that's just the way I like to do it. And I've done days where I just go around with the Livescope and scan around. You can find them that way. It's a lot less efficient, but also I find that when I go out and don't use the Livescope, and I just put my 360 on. The 360 is amazing technology for being able to pinpoint your casts, and I love my 360 imaging for that. And honestly, the days when I put the Livescope away and just use the 360, there are days when I catch a lot more fish that way, when the fish are biting the traditional baits that I catch fish on, jigs, bottom baits, crankbaits, stuff like that. But when those fish are suspended, specifically on days when they're suspended, like that day where I caught the 10-pounder yesterday, those fish get in a position where they're very hard to catch on a jig or a crankbait or traditional swim bait, and you need to use a jerk bait, or you need to use a very unique retrieve with a swim bait to get those fish to bite. And that's when I'm catching a lot more fish on days when I'm struggling. And what I'll do a lot of times, Randy, is I will go out and not have my Livescope turned on. I'll take the Livescope and turn it off, and I'll start fishing a series of brush piles with my side imaging, down imaging, and with the 360. And if I'm not getting bit within the first couple of hours of fishing, or first 30, 40 minutes with the 360 imaging, I hit 3 or 4 spots, I'll then rerun those spots with the Livescope, get a sense for what those fish are doing, find the right bait or the retrieve, and I'll turn it back off. I don't use it the entire day because I find I get distracted with it. I'm following fish one way and another way, and I'm trying to chase them around, and it hurts my fishing. And when I'm trying to go out and just catch them consistently, I'm looking for fish that are related to cover. I want fish, if I pull up a screen, guys, here, I want fish that are related to some sort of cover, rocks, brush, something like that. These fish are in an ambush mode, and they're a lot easier to catch than fish that are just randomly swimming out here in the middle of the lake. Now, I've caught fish just when they're feeding on shad randomly in the middle, but it's like waiting for schooling fish. Oh, so I need to share my screen. So when these fish are randomly out here in the middle, it's like chasing schooling fish is literally what it is. They're under the surface, and you have to wait till they bust on the shad to get them to bite. Just like when you're fishing for schooling fish, you have to wait for those fish to bust on the surface, then throw a topwater. And when those fish are on the surface busting, you can catch them. It's really hard to catch them, though, when they go back under the surface. Same thing with the Livescope on those schooling fish under the water. You have to wait till those bass are actually feeding on the shad to get them to bite. But those bass that are related to cover, rocks, brush, stuff like that, those fish are in ambush mode, and you can catch those fish most of the time if you're using the right presentation and the right bait. And most of the time, I don't even need the Livescope to determine that. I can just pick up a crankbait, a jig, swim bait, my normal baits, throw them in there, make 5 or 7 casts, and I get bit. I don't need the Livescope. But again, on those days when those bass are really picky, or they're suspended, or it's post front, I need to get a really specific retrieve to trigger them, like that day with the 10-pounder. That's what I find is what I need to do, and the Livescope helps. So that's at least my 2 cents with it. I know there's a lot of pros to the Livescope from if you dial it in perfectly, but for me, one that's not my favorite thing to do is, for example, I don't throw an Alabama rig in a Livescope, Randy. I remember we went out in October on Grand Lake. Fishing was tough as nails, really, really tough fishing in October on Grand, and I went out there with the Livescope and the Alabama rig, and when the fishing was brutal tough, I figured out in the last 2 hours of the day I could catch them on the Livescope with the Alabama rig on suspended fish, and I had 4 fish for like 9 pounds or something like that in 2 hours. And if I had been doing it all day, I would have had probably 17, 18 pounds because I had some really good ones in there. And that to me just turned me off from all that, because I was like, it made to the point where fishing with the Alabama rig plus the Livescope was too simple, because basically that Alabama rig imitates a school of bait fish. So if you ever see any fish on your graph suspended, pitch the Alabama rig to them, work it by them, and they're going to eat it like 9 times out of 10. That's just how it works a lot of times. If you know the right retrieve, you're throwing the right bait, stuff like that. So I don't do that anymore, because that turned me off from. It seemed too much like cheating for me, but that's just me personally.
Well, I got a question for you, and I bet a lot of our listeners have this question too. Because I mean, you're a student of the sport, Johnny. I mean, you study the sport. I mean, you live it and eat and breathe it like a lot of us do. At what point do you think that technology is going to get to the point where we have got to put some reins on it, say, hey, look, this is enough, or it's gone too far? You know, at what point do we reach that? Is it when eventually we have a 25-inch screen on our boat that shows you everything that's under the water? I mean, when do we eventually place a limitation on technology, or do
And
you think that it needs to be placed? I mean,
I don't know. And I'm not. You're better at the controversial takes, Randy. I'm just over here. I like the technology for learning fish behavior. I don't fish tournaments anymore, so I'm gonna keep my hands out of that pot. That's not really my pot to stir. But
okay, that would be a good topic for one of my YouTube
yeah,
channels.
I'll let you handle that, Randy. For me, I like the technology for learning the bass behavior aspect, but I feel like honestly, if pros could use that technology outside of the tournaments and learn the behavior, they could catch those fish pretty consistently in the tournaments without the technology. If they're able to put two and two together and get everything together, I think that they could do that. And I think that that's probably where it should go, potentially. I don't know, though, as it flows. I do think a lot of you guys overestimate, the idea of you need to just be staring at a screen all day. I saw a comment over here. Basically said, let's see here, from Danny says, I'm teaching my kids how to catch fish, not read more electronics. I'd rather understand the weather, water levels, entomology, and figure them out. Way more rewarding than shooting fish in a barrel. I understand that comment completely. One thing I will say is that it's not that easy with the Livescope or electronics to go out and catch fish. I think guys see and hear that it's so easy, but then they've never actually gone and done it. And when I go with my side imaging, down imaging, I'm graphing for 4 hours. I don't think anyone understands how hard it is to drive your boat around in a circle for 4 hours with your electronics. I'm used to it by now. I don't think that 95% of the guys in this live stream could stand to not make a cast for 4 hours. Like, you have to pick up a bait. You would see a stretch of boat docks. You get tired after graphing for 4 hours. I do that all the time, though, because I'm searching for the fish and I'm trying to find the fish and understand the situation. But while I'm graphing, I'm using the water level, the seasonal patterns, the weather, the temperature, the algae blooms, all these things. I'm taking it into account while I'm trying to find the fish. And for me, it's like solving a big puzzle. I go to the lake to solve all this puzzle. There's a million pieces to put together. I put them all together, and then it rewards me with catching fish. And for me, that puzzle of understanding nature, seeing, the current's flowing 20,000 cubic feet per second, the water's down 3 feet, water clarity is this, the shad are here, the bass are here. I love that puzzle. For me, that's the most rewarding thing in fishing. That's why I don't do competitions as much either anymore. It's because I prefer solving the puzzle. Once I solve it, I want to go solve a new puzzle. I don't want to go back and fish the same puzzle or the same fish for 6-7 days in a row. For me, that's boring. It's like really boring. I like to go re-figure it out, go to a new area of the lake and find all the pieces. And the electronics are my underwater eyes to understand it better. So that's how my thoughts on fishing. I'm still connecting with nature, but we can't see under the water. The electronics, again, are the underwater eyes to kind of see that, but they still have to take all the other factors into account. And that's just me. I know with people, I've learned to fish without electronics. I fished for 10 years of my life without ever using electronics. So I learned without them. So I understand that whole concept as well. But I understand the idea of you don't want to maybe get started on electronics. But I don't know. It's hard to find a balance because I guess it's hard because I love my electronics, but I also was raised without them and learned to fish from half my life without them. So it's kind of hard to say there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, I think a lot of the I don't want to call it division, but a lot of the attitudes we have about forward-facing technology and stuff like that, I think it falls into a demographic because I think that anglers, in my age group or older, or maybe just a little bit younger, I think they tend to be more resistant to that than
Yeah.
your age group, which is just sort of the natural progression. But one thing I'll say about this is when you're looking at technology or technological advances in our sport, I think that GPS mapping had a bigger impact on changing the sport than live scope or any side imaging or down imaging because
100% agree.
it has. I mean, a lot of guys out there, they don't understand what it was like back in the day before GPSs. I mean, I started my career before all we had was paper maps on our lap, and a compass. We didn't have any GPS. You had to triangulate everything. You had to run by compass, and the learning curve as far as fishing offshore was, it just took forever. I mean, and I remember back at Grand Lake back in the late 80s and 90s, I found so much good stuff just by randomly running down the lake and seeing it on my flasher unit. The map that good back then. You didn't have these humps and high spots and ridges and drops on the topographical maps. All the stuff that we found offshore was just by the haphazard. And that's why a handful of us that figured that out early on, we dominated, but we did not keep up with the technology. I mean, I was fishing offshore Grand Lake, and catching big bags of fish offshore before anybody else down there did, but I did not keep up with technology as it advanced every single year. So from my standpoint, the GPS mapping has probably had more of an impact than anything else, even what we're seeing now.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to give Danny props. He said here, I appreciate and acknowledge your comment, Johnny. Not totally against Livescope. For pros, it's progression, okay? No different than NFL, NBA, NHL. They all use technology to advance the sport. And I kind of, that makes sense there. And, what you're saying, Randy, too, makes complete sense. I think it's just, it's hard with the mapping and all this stuff. Like, all of these things have made a big impact. Mapping, side imaging. Side imaging was crazy. Kevin Van Dam had side imaging on the Tennessee River before anyone else with Humminbird, and he dominated. All those. If you go back and watch all the tournaments from the Tennessee River back in the day, KVD was winning everything. Pickwick, Wheeler, Kentucky Lake. He dominated. Why? Because he had side imaging and he learned it before anyone else, and he was just kicking everyone's butt. And that was like, no one was talking about it back then because it wasn't as... I don't think people really had got that figured out yet. Maybe if we had YouTube and as much social media as we have now, everyone would be like, side scans, the end of the world. I really do think if we had this much interaction on the internet and stuff, it would have been the same way in 2006, 2007. Would you agree there, Randy?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt. I mean, it's constantly evolving. And people say, well, that's just progress. You can't fight progress. And some of it's progress in my opinion, but some of it is not progress. I mean, I've just got that opinion that, I mean, I'm probably like a lot of guys out there. I mean, you can't really change my mind on certain things like that. That's just sort of ingrained in my being. So, but life has changed, man. That's the whole thing about life in general. Nothing is static. Everything is changing in life. It doesn't matter if it's fishing or personal life or whatever like that. That's just the nature of reality, man.
For sure. And I do want to address one more comment here. Someone mentioned that they asked how many days a week I fish. Do you fish 3 to 4 days a week? Guys, with editing, it takes me, I've mentioned this before on like the live stream channels, it takes me 30 to 40 hours, not a joke, to make one YouTube video. So I'm lucky if I can fish more than 1 day a week. I go fishing 1, maybe 2 days a week if I'm lucky. I would say on average I fish six times a month. And when I go out those 6 times a month, a lot of times, half the time, I'm doing other filming that's unrelated to fishing. I have to do other stuff. So really, I'm probably only going out and actually fishing 4 days a month. So basically, like what most guys would do just on the weekend, one time a week. And that's why I have to be so efficient with my electronics to find the fish. And that's how I've always been. I mean, I've basically always just fished 1 day a week. I don't think I've ever fished more than like 2 or 3 days a week in like the last more than 2 or 3 days a week over the last 5 years. Like I'm usually fishing once or twice a week. That's it. And that's just kind of the way it is. And that's why electronics for me are super helpful because it allows me to eliminate water quickly and consistently catch fish. I go to the lake because I do want to catch fish. I don't want to just go around and just like not catch anything, randomly fishing down the bank and not catching anything. When I go, I want to catch fish, and now that I'm making YouTube videos, I have to catch fish. So that's where, for me, the electronic side imaging, down imaging, even using Livescope helps make it more fun for me in that sense. And if you have the budget to get a Livescope, it can help you catch more fish. Or if you have a budget to get a 360 imaging, you can make more accurate casts, things like that. And it definitely makes you more efficient and helps you put more fish in the boat, but you have to use it all in combination. It's not like you can just get a 360 imaging or just get a Livescope and go and catch a ton of fish. You have to have other aspects, not just knowledge of fishing in general, but a lot of times, in my opinion, you're going to be able to catch 10 times more fish if you know how to use side imaging, down imaging really, really well versus just knowing how to use Livescope. because you're going to be able to cover so much more water graphing at 4 or 5 miles an hour. And if you know how to use it really well, you can find those fish and eliminate water way faster than you can with a live scope. And I can see if there's fish in a brush pile just as well as someone can with a live scope by using side imaging and down imaging. I can tell you just as easily how many fish are in a brush pile with down imaging as I can with the live scope. It's just that's the way it is. And I think that people have a disconnect there and they don't want to use their technology. They want to. One thing that's nice about Livescope is you can mount it on your trolling motor. You can go around the lake and you can be graphing while you're fishing. So you can cast and you can graph at the same time. Or when I'm graphing, I'm sitting on my steering wheel driving for 3, 4, 5 hours, not casting. So I'm going to the lake to solve the puzzle, to hunt the fish, then cast. Most guys do not want to go on their 1 day a week fishing, driving around in a boat. They want to go fishing, and for me, it's a job. So I do it because, one, I like it, but two, like, some days it sucks, Randy. Honestly, when it's like 30 degrees outside, it sucks sitting in your boat, driving around for 4 hours. It also sucks when the fish are all over the bank, and you can see them over there blowing up, and I know I need to make offshore videos because that's what you guys want for content. And I'm graphing around, and I'm watching 3-pounders blow up in the bushes, and I'm like, gotta keep graphing for the content. Like, that's what I do for you guys. It's not always easy making YouTube videos. So that's my little rant there. That's as much of a rant as I'm gonna do, Randy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the truth. I mean, it's just like I'm like everybody else. I mean, I like to be catching. I mean, I love to cast and everything, but I mean, ultimately, we want to be catching fish. And to me, like, the worst thing in the world is just to spend my time on the water, idling around, looking at my graph. I want to be over there, pitching that dock or fishing that stump or that type of stuff. And, here's the thing, guys, if you like to fish like that, don't feel bad about it. I mean, you can use all the information that we're putting out there, and you can do both, or you can just do one. If you like to fish offshore, I mean, develop those strengths and get really good at that. If you don't like it, stay shallow. Nobody tells you you've got to fish deep, but the whole thing that we're trying to teach here is, Jonny and I, it's all about versatility and diversity and giving you a little bit of everything. He's expert on offshore deep water fishing, understanding how to read your electronics. And, I know a lot about, bass behavior, shallow water, how to catch them up shallow. And if you're going to advance your skills of an angler and really reach your full potential as an angler, you have to do a little bit of both. I mean, you can't just get, narrow-minded focused on one like that. A lot of it just depends on what you want to get out of the sport, so everybody has a different set of priorities there.
For sure. Yeah, guys, if you don't like electronics, you don't like Livescope, you don't have to buy them. It's really not necessary. If you don't like graphing, if you don't like stuff, you don't need any of that technology to go catch fish. The one thing a lot of guys, if you want to be competitive in tournaments, it is getting to a point where Livescope and 360 imaging and fish finders and taking a lot of time to graph is important. One thing I always say, Randy, this is something I always want to reiterate. You're not going to get an A on a college physics exam if you never go to class and you don't study for the test. You're not. You're going to fail because you've never went to the class, you never studied. Even if you go to the class every single day and you show up and you listen to the content and stuff like that, but you never study the night before the test, you're still going to get like a C unless you're a genius savant, So the thing is that if you want to get an A on your test, for me, if you're going to go in a tournament and consistently get A's, and it's not just a random A because you click the right answers randomly or something else, if you want to consistently get good grades on a physics exam, you need to study. Well, for me, studying when I go fishing is graphing. I spend 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours graphing. That's my studying. I study the lake, I understand it, and that's the time I put in to then consistently catch fish. I can consistently catch them almost every time I go fishing, guys. I hardly ever go and don't catch 2 or 3 or 4 fish offshore when I go, but it's because I put in the hours graphing. It's hard. It's not easy, but I go out for 8 hours, graph for 4 to 6 hours. Sometimes I graph for 7 hours, and then I pull up on one spot and catch 3 fish. It took me 7 hours of graphing to catch 3 fish, but I didn't 0 at least. And that's how it goes. But it's like studying for that physics test. So hopefully that makes sense. That's all I can say. If you don't like that, if you don't want to put in the hours and the effort, graphing, then just pick up a spinnerbait, get a kayak or a bass boat, no electronics, and just fish. I did that for years, never use electronics, and I love fishing. I got hooked on fishing for 10 years of my life, and I never even knew how to read a fish finder. So it's not necessary to have fun and enjoy fishing and have electronics. That's just what I enjoy now, and Randy's, again, you're the opposite. So that's kind of what I'm Again, I'm getting a little bit ranty, Randy. You're rubbing off on me.
That's okay. That keeps it interesting, man. We can't get too boring here, but yeah, I mean that's the whole thing about it. It's like, everybody talks about yeah, you got to spend a lot of time in the water to get good, which is true. But the reality of it, excuse me, is most of us don't have a lot of time to spend on the water. We have family obligations, we have to work, we have other things to do in life. So the time that you do get on the water, you have to maximize that time and decide where you want to grow at. I mean, if you like fishing offshore and if you like the electronics game, spend the time you have out there doing that. If you like to flip a jig up on the bank, do that. But nobody gets as much time on the, unless you're single and you don't have any family and you're independently wealthy, nobody gets enough time on the water. So we got to make the most of it when we do.
For sure. Cool. Well, so a couple things I want to say real quick, guys. One, remind you about the new Jewelbait Fish the Moment VersaCraw. Designed this bait with Jewelbait Company, my first soft plastic bait. We currently just have the peewee size available, the smallest size. We're literally cutting the molds this week for the medium size and then the bigger size. So we're going to have the other sizes available, but we have the small size. We're coming out with a really big size. We also have a medium size. The most versatile chunk trailer on the market, guys. You basically can customize this thing where you can have it keep all the tails together to create like a chunk or a beaver style bait, split them all apart so you have a big creature bait, pin them back so you have a finesse craw or you have a big flapping craw. You basically get 7 baits in one trailer. It can eliminate almost all the tackle you have in your tackle box in terms of craws and trailers and jigs. I'll be making videos about it. I talked about earlier in the stream too. I don't want to go too deep into it, but one thing I want to say is if you want to pick up these trailers and try the peewee size and then check out the other ones, go to jewelbait.com, check out the new VersaCraw by Jewelbait, partner with Fish the Moment, and check it out. You can see it right here, 7 ways to rig it. You can get the peewee size. Comes in 3 cool colors, black and blue, green pumpkin, and then bass whacker. And then also, guys, if you are interested, head over to our website, fishthemoment.com, and check out our upcoming seminars. I'll be doing an advanced electronics seminar coming up here in a couple weeks. If you guys are really interested in learning your electronics, figuring out how to maximize your time on the water with your electronics, how to determine, are there fish in the spot? Are they catchable? Should I fish here? Should I not? And learn all the tricks and of the trade that I use when I'm graphing for 4 hours. I do it a lot, so I know all the tricks. I can basically tell you anywhere on the lake if a spot has fish and if they're catchable. I don't share all the information in YouTube videos, and I'm going to explain all of my dirty little secrets, maybe not dirty, but my super secrets, as Randy would say on his channel, of the electronics, and I give it all away here, guys. I did this seminar back in January. It booked up like a ton of people, so I'll open up a few more spots as needed. And this is a great seminar. If you did it in January, it's a repeat of what I did in January, so no need to sign up again if you've already done it. And then we also have our advanced jig fishing seminar, spring jig fishing seminar. If you want more information about how to fish shallow and offshore with a jig, I know it's a common pain point for a lot of anglers, definitely check out the seminar as well. Randy and I are going to be breaking down our best patterns for jig fishing in the spring, pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn. And as always, check out some lake breakdowns, 40 GPS waypoints on lakes all across the country. And we have spring breakdowns, fall. You guys know the drill. Anyways, so Randy, last thing I wanted to talk to you about is we potentially talked about you getting into some kayak fishing tournaments. And there's a lot of guys who kayak fish. I want to get your interest peaked on that. And I also want to hear from you guys down in the comments of this live stream. One, if you're still here and you're one of these 400 people that is still here listening, go down and leave a like on this live stream. It helps us out a ton, gets the video shared out. Just leave a like down there. If we get 400 likes on this, it'll explode, go to a bunch of people, and it'll be great. So go down there, leave a like on the video, subscribe to Fish Moment Live, subscribe to Fish the Moment, subscribe to Randy's channel, Randy Blockett Intuitive Angling. But anyways, Randy, kayak fishing. What do you think? Let us know in the comments too if Randy should do it.
Man, I'm all about the kayak deal. I mean, I started out in a 10-foot canoe. You know me, I'm nature boy fisherman. I love, the primitive, the primal aspects of bass fishing, the just the fishing aspect of it. So we talked about this before, and I'm seriously considering getting in some kayak tournaments and pursuing that end of it. I mean, I just think that is a better fit for my entire vibe, the way that I like to fish. And I'm curious to see how that would unfold because it requires a completely different approach. It's the approach I like. It's the stealth. It's the quiet. It's the getting up close and personal, with the fish. And it's just exploding everywhere. I really can't believe how quick and how popular kayak bass fishing is getting. When it started out like 10 years ago or something, I just thought it was a fad that some guys that, they had to fish was farm ponds and they just needed something to put in there. But man, it is a big deal now. I mean, it really is. I mean, and it's $100,000 for first place in some of the tournaments. So you guys may be seeing me in a kayak tournament here before too much longer.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. And obviously, Randy, you don't have to worry. I don't know, guys. All I know is that, Randy, even though you're going to go potentially do kayak fishing, you're not going to escape Livescope. I know guys already got Livescopes on their kayaks. They got motors, trolling motors. They have like 3 fish finders. You're going to see these tricked out rigs where all the accessories are worth 10 times the kayak. So yeah, you're going to get escape it. But hey, you might be able to get in some sneaky areas now.
Man, I'm telling you right now, Johnny, I'm just going to say it. Kayaks have no place for Livescope. That's like putting ketchup on $100 steak or something like that. That is no place for Livescope. We got to draw a line somewhere, man.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think that's true. But yeah, no, actually, I got some kayaks arriving tomorrow. I got a trolling motor style kayak, a pedal style kayak. I'm going to do some kayak electronics content. And I actually have some cool studies, Randy, I want to do where I'm going to idle over some fish with my bass boat, then go over them with a kayak and see if the engine spooks the fish and all that stuff. I have some cool stuff I have going on there. And I'm also going to do some kayak content for you guys. Because I think, reviewing some best electronics for kayaks and things like that, best strategies for using electronics on kayaks. I'm going to make content like that for you guys. So be on the lookout for that. Always check out Randy's channel, Randy Block Intuitive Angling. Check out the main Fish the Moment channel. And obviously you can check out the Fish the Moment live channel. That's where you are right now. This is just for our live streams. If you want to check out our other videos, I have highly edited content over at Fish the Moment, our main channel, where I spend like 30 to 40 hours a week editing each YouTube video. And then Randy has his channel, Randy Block Intuitive Angling. He drops 2 videos a day, tons of content, bait modifications, rants about bass fishing, great stories about him posing nude for bass fishing magazines. There's all kinds of good stuff over there. So check out his channel. It's a hoot. And other than that, guys, hopefully you guys are enjoying the stream. Thanks everyone for joining in. Randy, anything else?
Yeah, thanks again, guys, man. We really appreciate it. It's, thanks to you guys, Fish the Moment Live is the most watched, the biggest live podcast in the country, man. So much appreciated for you guys tuning in. We don't take it for granted. And just know that we're really humbled by that you guys have taken time out of your evening to join us here. Thank you very much.
Sure, guys. Thanks for all the great support. And we'll see you guys next week, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, same place, same time. Have a great night. Best of luck on the water if you make it out this week. See you later.